Why are lazy people fireproof at work? We've all been there. You work your ass off, you go above and beyond, and you're a top performer. If hard work actually paid off, you'd be running the place. But all you're getting is more work. Meanwhile, Slacker Chad is doing none of the work and he is untouchable. Why does the system reward laziness? Well, bestie, grab your tea because we are going to be spilling the 4 reasons why lazy people get job security and promotions while you get stuck doing their work. Once you see how these dynamics really work, you're never going to unsee it. At one of my corporate jobs, I worked with the laziest person I ever encountered. Let's call him Kyle. Kyle was actually a nice guy. I had no problem with him as a person. But as a coworker, he did F all. Our team was drowning. Everyone was doing the work of at least 3 people because the company was committed to doing more with less. Everyone got it, and everyone did everything that they could do to contribute to the team. Except for Kyle. Kyle would casually stroll in whenever he felt like it, chat for about a half an hour, wander out for coffee, and finally find a quiet place to do some work. And anytime I walked by, all he was doing was watching YouTube videos. And not work-related ones like this one. My videos are obviously professional development and should be watched at work, right? But that's not what he was doing. He was like watching basketball highlights. His individual work was fairly siloed, so most of the time we just rolled our eyes at Kyle and powered through our jobs. That said, we did have some collaborative projects, and in these, Kyle did as little as possible. He would push back on taking responsibilities because he was so busy. And when he did agree to take something on, it didn't matter how clear the task and the timeline were. 9 times out of 10, he was not going to do it. And we'll come back to that 1 time out of 10 in just a minute. Of course, my coworkers and I would have to pick up his slack and blame. What was even worse, though, was when his individual responsibilities were not being met, somehow we were getting stuck dealing with the problems. And we were being held accountable for his F-ups. Knowing what I know now, though, it makes perfect sense. Because here's the thing. You're like me. You're a high achiever, and part of that involves being a good teammate. You don't think twice about stepping in to help when needed. And if we're being real honest, you're probably a little bit of a people pleaser, but that's a conversation for a whole other video. The point is this: if we were to pull up your performance review evaluation material, scoring is a no-brainer. You're exceeding expectations in every single checkbox, and you pride yourself on this. But lazy people like Kyle, well, they don't care about any of that. Instead, lazy people at work are hyper-focused on just one thing: minimum viable expectations, or MVE. If I were to walk up to Kyle and ask him what the bare minimums he needed to meet were, he would have told me exactly what they were. He would even know which expectations he was supposed to meet that didn't really matter. I mean, he probably wouldn't actually admit that to me, but you know what I mean. Most importantly, lazy people know the phantom checkboxes that will protect them when they do the absolute least. Lazy people never waste time on things that are going to go unnoticed. They know what they can get away with not doing and how to get away with it when it does cause a problem, usually by having you pick up the slack, the blame, or both. Which brings me to that 1 time out of 10, where they put the effort in, and the second reason why lazy people make themselves unfireable at work. Lazy people have mastered the art of effort arbitrage. They do the least amount of work for the maximum amount of credit. And they do this using the law of strategic visibility. One way they do this is something that always drove me up the wall in my corporate career. Here's how it works. While you're at your desk, powering through lunch, Kyle's wandering around the office, having yap sessions and doing everything except his job. And somehow, he looks busy doing it. Like, our boss never confronted Kyle about the fact that 80% of his day was yapping. And we're going to come back to that point when we talk about the 4th reason why. But when lazy people do this, they're actually raising their visibility. They're building their reputation with people who don't know what their actual job is or how bad they are at it. Lazy people know that their job performance has the lowest impact on their promotability, just 10% according to Pi theory. What's much more important is their image and exposure. Lazy people know this intuitively, and they ignore the 10% and they go all in on the 90. That's why you're doing the real work, and the Kyles of the world are out there creating the illusion of exceptionalism. Which brings us to that 1 out of 10 instance I mentioned. Lazy people aren't just tuned into MVE. They know exactly when they should strategically overachieve, which is why if there are executive eyes on that project, all of a sudden, Kyle isn't watching YouTube. He's in the zone. And he's not just putting in the work, he's loudly doing it. Sometimes this is literal and he's loudly bragging about everything that he does. Other times it's humble brags while they do their office lap to avoid real work. Either way, they invest their effort when it has a disproportionate ROI for them. What's even more frustrating, well, enraging actually, is they don't stop there. Because even if they know they haven't put the work in, lazy people will claim credit for it. I can't tell you how many of my clients have the same story. They did 90% of the project, they pulled the late nights, they cleaned up the mess, only for their lazy coworker to take credit for it. They capitalize on the fact that you're humble, that you're not out there bragging about yourself. But that creates a vacuum where they can take credit for your impact. They make themselves the hero in the story. In my experience working with lazy people like Kyle, though, there is one thing that is even more frustrating than when they take credit for your work. It's when you get blamed for their mistakes, which brings us straight to reason 3. But first, real quick, a word from today's video sponsor. Because you're not just dealing with lazy people at work, you're dealing with unfairness. You can end up overlooked, undermined, and taken advantage of at work. So many of my clients have realized that they are in invisible patterns that keep them stuck in environments where favoritism and toxic work dynamics thrive until they can spot them and escape them. To help you spot yours, I created a free assessment to help you spot them. You can take it for free right now at toxicjobquiz.com. Now, I have worked with hundreds of people who have dealt with lazy people and favoritism at work, and there has been one universal truth. Lazy people are never held accountable for their failures. Instead, they become parasitic leeches off high performers like you. Here's how they position themselves to be held accountable for success while having zero accountability for failure. It starts with one of the most pervasive dynamics and the most damaging when you're working with a lazy person. I call it the uneven bars of expectations. Lazy people don't just operate based on MVE. They have lower expectations put on them because of it. Now, don't underestimate your boss's intelligence. They know exactly who they can count on when they need something done and who they would never call. That's why your boss turns to you. But lazy people, I can assure you that my boss never asked Kyle to take on extra work. They knew that Kyle would avoid it at all costs, which would leave them in an emergency to deal with, where I would ultimately get tapped in anyway. So why not just go straight to the source and get it done right the first time? This dynamic creates the high performer tax because you're reliable, you always excel, and you take on extra work without reward. They expect even more from you, while they don't expect anything from your lazy coworker. Another installation strategy lazy people at work use is the delegation loop. Now, let's go back to Kyle to illustrate this one. As I mentioned, Kyle always did his best to avoid responsibility on projects. He would feign busyness. Wasting time is such a burden, isn't it? When Kyle did this, the rest of us got stuck with the extra work, so it was unfairly and unevenly distributed. But Kyle's avoidance tactic didn't just protect him from having to do the actual work. It provided him protection. If something went sideways, Kyle wasn't accountable because he wasn't involved. The rest of us were to blame, even if the problem was that no one else had time to pick up his slack. On the other hand, though, if it was a 9 out of 10 project where Kyle had misjudged the project's visibility, he would still come in and claim credit for the success. If anyone took issue with him not pulling his weight in either situation, it wasn't seen as a problem. When lazy people pass off work, leadership doesn't perceive it as laziness. It's delegation, which is a crucial promotion earning skill. Heck, most of the leadership team probably got there doing exactly the same thing. What comes to mind for most people when I talk about delegation is a formal process, like when your boss tells you to do X, and that's clearly delegation. But lazy people use stealth delegation. Sometimes they do this through feigned incompetence. They pretend that they don't know how or they don't have the right tools to complete the task. So you need to show them what you know, which really just means do it for them. But most often, lazy people's approach to stealth delegation is simply by creating pressure. When you have a project to deliver and their part isn't done, they don't care. They know that it puts you in a position of either doing the work for them or dealing with the consequences of it being undone, because they always find a way to make you hold the bag while they get off scot-free. Since they've schmoozed, kiss-assed, and managed perceptions of themselves doing important work, they can manipulate the situation. They could pretend that they had more important and more urgent work that took priority over this, and you refused to be a team player and help out. Or you picked up their slack and the project was delivered successfully, and they're still taking credit for it. Either way, it is not a problem for them. Which leads us to the fourth reason why lazy people don't get fired, they get promoted. And it also brings us back to Kyle's gapping. Now, Kyle spent 80% of his day doing nothing. He had chats, he surfed the internet, he did the bare minimum of the job. But it was not a problem for our boss. Here's why. Kyle wasn't doing anything, which meant he wasn't causing any problems. I mean, he was, but as we talked about, he was never held accountable for any of those problems at all. Because either someone else, typically me, would swoop in and save the day or end up with the blame. And Kyle didn't do a lot of work, so there wasn't a lot of mistakes or missteps for him to make. And Kyle never made the boss feel insecure. He was a non-threat because he didn't do anything. Kyle wasn't difficult to work with because Kyle didn't work. Were there complaints about the unfair distribution of work and how lazy Kyle was? Yes, of course. But the work was still getting done by other people, so it wasn't a problem for our boss. Ultimately, lazy people at work are a problem for you, not the higher ups, because you're the one who takes the brunt of their laziness, picks up their slack, and in the end ensures that their laziness isn't a problem. Which, of course, their laziness is not your fault, and you're not to blame for the dynamic. But if you continue to be put in the position to compensate for their laziness, you're not only going to continue to be held unfairly accountable, you will burn out because it is not sustainable. But how can you escape the uneven bars of expectations and escape the dynamic? Well, you're going to go watch this video now where I tell you exactly how to do it. I'm going to see you over there, bestie.